Paul Danczyk, today with Ross Clayton. Dr. Clayton is a professor emeritus at the University of Southern California and is going to share some insights about a theory called Coalignment Theory as a way to help us understand how organizations should be structured. Dr. Clayton, great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So the first question on my mind is, what is this thing called Coalignment Theory?
Well, Coalignment Theory is a notion that leaders have as their quintessential function keeping their organization into harmony with its context. As its context changes, leaders are expected to be alert to the changes and make adjustments to their organization to keep it in alignment with the context. So that's a real quick overview, but we'll get into it in more detail when we get into the graphics.
What do you see as the components to it, to put in context?
But the context are the organization's structure, its turf or domain that it's attempting to impact, its network of resources that it can employ to achieve its goals. And of course, its goals and missions are a component as well. So we refer to that as its agenda. And the agenda needs to adjust as the context changes.
Before we dive in more into the model, how have you thought about the application as it applied to your career?
Well, it applied pretty dramatically when I became dean of the school, because the school itself had major problems at the time I took over. And it was very helpful to think about the problems the school was having in light of the model of co-alignment. So I mentally made that kind of analysis, and it helped guide me in my decisions as to how to approach being a dean of the school for the decade that I was dean.
So the tool itself can be used during times where we're trying to understand the lay of the land and how to move things forward. Is that a fair way of identifying it?
That's a good comment. It can be used in real time as you're steering an organization along, so that as changes like a pandemic occur, you can think through fairly systematically things you need to pay attention to and perhaps adjust. So
always reinforces that systems approach of being able to look at complexity through a specific lens.
Yeah, I'm very much a systems guy. I think that's a very important approach to organizations.
I know you have some diagrams to share. Is it okay to jump into the first one?
Yeah, let me start by saying, take a minute if you're listening to this to think about how you would visualize organizations or your organization, and mentally draw a quick diagram or chart of how you view organizations. And then this next slide is the way I view organizations, which is a systems view. But my experience over time is most people think of organizations initially as hierarchies, and they think of the structure of the organization. And so if I were in a classroom and asked this question, about 9 out of 10 students would be drawing what we would call a hierarchical model of their organization. So why don't you put up the first slide? Okay, this is what I call a generic organizational model. It shows 7 interdependent variables, and the point of interdependence is any change in one affects all the others. And you can look at it and see that the environment is one of those, and environment and context are the two terms I use somewhat interchangeably. And for a school like the School of Public Administration, the environment is the broader university as well as the larger field of public administration, public policy, and public affairs. So the environment had changed dramatically at USC, and it was affecting all the other variables in a major way. For example, the resources were disappearing. There was inadequate budget to pursue what we had been doing as a school. And our technology of delivering classes through a network of centers was in question. And the climate of the morale of the school was severely undercut by the necessity to cut about $1 million in resources from its budget. And of course, the ideology or the values and myths the school had about itself and stories it told about itself were going to be changing rather dramatically given was essentially a crisis.
Dr. Clayton, can I ask a clarifying question? We were talking about the climate and the impacted by the budget side. I know this is on the mind of a lot of people that we work with right now on different fluctuations within the budget structure and being scaled back. When you said $1 million, what percentage of your budget would you say that was at the time?
Well, let me clarify a little bit. The school submitted a budget request for about $9 million, and the provost and budget vice president said, sorry, but you're not going to get $9 million. You're going to have to cut your request to $8 million. So it's not quite 10% of the budget.
That's very significant. Yeah, sorry for cutting you off on the ideology side.
No problem at all. I was about through there anyway. But the point is, schools have a history and they have a lot of stories and myths about themselves that change radically when a major cut in your budget occurs. And of course, the tasks had a lot to do with what our agenda was and how we were affecting our domain or our clientele. And the tasks had to change to fit the new context of the university. And I could say more about how those changes were occurring if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. As a way to help us understand in greater detail what the task might look like for our organizations.
Yeah, the school was essentially servicing many of the other parts of the university with its programs that had semester programs in Los Angeles, Sacramento, and Washington, D.C. that were very popular, involved experiential exposure and opportunities for internships that could lead to jobs. And so they were popular on the campus. And those were going to be badly damaged by the changes that were occurring in the university. Let me tell you about a few of those because they are interesting. The university for years had operated with two budgets, a Type 1 budget, which was the operating budget of the university that went through the normal budgetary cycle, and a Type 2 budget, which picked up less certain programs, contracts, and opportunities. They were a bit risky. And so Type 2 budgets went in separately from the other budget proposals and were considered later in the fiscal year. And the university decided about this time to do away with Type 2 budgets. And the thing about Type 2 budgets was the overhead rate charged to those units on Type 2 budgets was only 25%, whereas the overhead for the operating budget was 40%. So doing away with Type 2 budgets immediately caused the school to have to charge another 15% on its formerly Type 2 budget units. And that was a big hit. Secondly, the university was changing to what they called revenue center management. And revenue center management was a interesting financial redistribution scheme. That's the way I would describe it. Every unit on the campus was assessed a fee for participating in the university. It was a sizable chunk. And that went into a pool of money, which the university then reallocated back to the units, but it did so in a way that favored some units and did not favor other units. For example, larger redistributions were given to the medical school, the law school, the business school, and the engineering school. But smaller redistributions were made to the public sector-oriented schools like social work, public administration, education, urban planning, libraries, etc. So the scheme basically amounted to another cut in the budget for the School of Public Administration. So that was a major problem. And those two were probably the major precipitants of the school's budget crisis.
Man, that's huge to be able to think about funds that way, reallocation of it.
Yeah, no, it reflected a university that was aspiring to more greatness, higher rankings nationally, and a board of trustees that made decisions on where they wanted to put their priorities. So it wasn't unreasonable, except it had a very strong negative effect on our school.
How did that change your thinking or shape your thinking as you're getting away from the generic organizational model?
Well, the two major things that came to mind right away was we need to have an endowment in order to cope with our financial needs. And we had zero endowment. So first thing that occurred to me as a dean was I was going to have to become a fundraising dean. And I was going to have to teach my faculty to expect me to be doing that, because they might wonder why I'm spending so much time running around Southern California. The second thing that was very clear to me was we needed stronger political support than we had. We were relying on our alumni as our support group when we needed private sector and nonprofit sector executives to be behind our school when we were dealing with the board of trustees, the provost, the budget vice president. We needed them to know that there were people out there that not only believed in us, but were willing to invest in our school. So that meant I was going to have to create a development office in the school and bring aboard a development director. So what I did was I canceled the personnel department of the school, personnel unit, and did away with it. And I took the personnel director and said, "You're now a development director, and you better learn very quickly." Which development at USC is an extremely political process, and it had all kinds of rules. In fact, the senior vice president for development didn't want us to have a board of counselors, and only because the provost supported me did I get permission to create a board of counselors. And once I had one, I still had to battle with the senior vice president, who said there are no more prospects available. They're all taken. And he said, "Give me an example of one you think might help you." And I said, "Well, General William Lyon would be one." And he said, "Who in the hell is that?" "Oh, you don't know all the prospects." Unfortunately, within a couple of months, the senior vice president, managed to get General Lyon on the campus and convince him to create a building on the campus called the Lyon Center, which is the center for students to do their exercises and swimming pools and so forth. So he gave them $10 million, and essentially he preempted my prospect that I mentioned. So you might guess that I didn't mention any more prospects to the senior vice president.
In those examples, I'm hearing the co-alignment theory. So in my mind, I'm jumping ahead, but I don't want to jump ahead. It's also reflective of a systems approach. And I'm wondering if it'd be helpful to share the systems diagram as you're thinking about the fundraising as a new goal that you had.
Yeah, let me back up a little bit and then do that. The nature of organization theories is that they're conceptual frames of reference for thinking about organizations and their management. So my argument is there's many of these conceptual frames of reference out there, and executives need to have a tool bag with a number of them in that tool bag, and they're really very helpful. So in that context, this is just an example of a tool one can use. It's basically a way of thinking of organizations as systems emphasizing the flow of information that occurs in organizations. So what you have on the screen is a diagram, and I have my students diagram their organization in some detail. So let me start by saying that the goals and objectives, the goals are longer term, mission centered, things like delivering education of a high quality, doing research, providing community service, and so forth. The objectives are shorter range, like you might use in management by objectives. You set out some objectives for the next year or even for the next 3 or 4 years, and you strive to meet those. And the way you do those is to take your resources and as inputs into your system, and the processor strives to convert the inputs into outputs. And the processor is basically the organization's itself, and it's conceived of as an input-output conversion mechanism, and it produces outputs. And I might say inputs come across the boundary into the organization, outputs go across the boundary and out of the organization. And I didn't draw the boundary, but it would come right along the output blocks. And outputs are only short term as they leave. You can measure them. Outcomes are the longer term consequences. You produce graduates. Where are they in 5 years? They're well-paying jobs? Are they making an impact on society and so forth? So those things need to be measured. So the measurement channel is measuring outputs and outcomes. And the system manager is the executive and his staff comparing what's coming out of their system with what they are striving for in terms of goals and objectives. And the control channel is essentially them making changes to steer the system over the next years. So the control channel essentially produces new inputs internally into the form of goals and objectives. And I did mention demands and constraints, but the school was given demands from the external environment to deliver certain programs. For example, the Sacramento Center was a response to demands from executives in the Sacramento government that they needed a quality program in Sacramento for people who would interstate service. And we got similar demands in Washington, D.C. and downtown that led to the Washington, D.C. Center and the Center for downtown Los Angeles that we had for many years. Constraints are basically things like absence of sufficient fiscal resources or shortage of staff to produce the outputs, and or university regulations like thou shalt not ask for money from major donors without permission from the senior vice president and so forth. So that's a quick and dirty walkthrough of the system diagram, but the idea behind it is very clear that conceptually it gives you a language that you can use to think about your organization. And organizational theories, for the most part, are frameworks of language that are very useful. And so language helps you think and act. And you need to have theories like this with the language they represent to mentally cope with the leadership of your organization. So that's a quick and dirty walkthrough.
No, that's great. And as you're talking about that case example of the fundraising side and building up your board of directors, is it fair to go from the systems diagram now to the components of co-alignment theory?
Yeah, that would be very, very appropriate. Yes. Let me give you a little background. This is a model that is based on a case study done up in Seattle, Washington, of one of their clinics, the Dodge Clinic. And I just borrowed it from them because they borrowed it from a book called Leaders in Action by a fellow named Cotter and Lawrence at Harvard. And Leaders in Action basically focused not on an organization, but it focused on the mayor and his behavior. So this co-alignment model is a derivative. It really comes from a book, very famous book called by James Thompson, Organizations in Action. And Thompson's the one that essentially said co-alignment is the quintessential requirement of leaders. They must keep their organizations in co-alignment. Okay, so here's the model, and the contextual variables in this one. Let's start talking about the School of Public Administration as being in the context, the organization. The agenda would be the school's goals and objectives. The networks are things like the school's alumni, its board of counselors, its established donors, its ties with downtown executives that aren't on the board but are still supporting the school, and its turf and its domain. Because of the school's budgetary crisis and the virtual elimination of its function of servicing all the other social sciences with semester programs, it was short of student body. It needed more students and enrollments to correct its revenue shortfalls. So these were important non-alignments. And a non-alignment between the school's agenda and its network would be represented by a squiggly line. And we had an agenda or plan for where we needed to go, but we didn't have a network to help us do that. So that was a major non-alignment at the time I became dean. The other non-alignment is the school's domain was just not what it should be. We had to redefine our domain, and that meant establishing new academic programs. So if you get the image here, the co-alignment model is looking at how well aligned are your contextual variables. So you've got 4 contextual variables. which means there are 6 relationships in total, back and forth around the edge and then across. And any one of those relationships could be out of alignment, and most were given the budget cutback. So the challenge was to bring them back into alignment over time, and it wasn't going to be a short-term fix because you don't make major changes like building a board of counselors or changing a curriculum overnight. You have to really work at it. So we, for example, did a number of things that were very helpful. We redefined our undergraduate degree program, tried to build into it a bit more social science, economics in particular, public finance. And we began the process of creating 3 new graduate degrees. So we created a master's degree in health administration, a degree in public policy, and we began working towards and eventually and now have a degree in philanthropy in public policy. And those are major components of the school today that are helping stabilize its budget. So that non-alignment was reduced over time. The Board of Counselors took some time. I literally started from scratch. I asked the president of the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce to come on and chair the board. That was Ray Remy. It was the former deputy mayor of Los Angeles and having a tremendous network himself. And John Argue, a lawyer in town who brought the Olympics to Los Angeles and eventually became chairman of the board of trustees of USC. And those two helped me put together a board of counselors. Ray, because of his personal connections, and John is the chairman of the Los Angeles Downtown Men's Club, the California Club. He actually hosted many of the lunches I had with executives to invite them onto the Board of Counselors. When I say hosted, he got me free parking and I couldn't pay for the lunch. So he literally hosted those and was very helpful. So we started the board with a few of our own alumni, the head of the city of Los Angeles, CAO, head of the county of Los Angeles, CAO, city manager of Long Beach, and a few others. And believe it or not, these were important additions because the executives coming on the board all were quite interested in getting to know these people. And so we started with the private sector executives, and we added people like the head of Transamerica Life Insurance Corporation, the head of the National Medical Enterprises Health System, the head of Lowry's Food Corporation, which was the key because he hosted many of our dinners of the board at his expense at Lowry's Prime Rib or at Lowry's California Center. We had the head of Baskin Robbins come on board, the head of Winchell's and Winchell's Donuts, and he owned, he had several restaurant chains. And from there, we went to the nonprofit area, and I invited the head of Blue Cross of California onto the board. And he said, Ross, it'll be fine if you'll come onto my board. So there went another assignment for me away from the campus. I served on his board for 10 years. He served on my board for 10 years. He's now on the board of trustees, for example. And I should mention that he gave the school $35 million to set up their health policy research institute, which is probably one of the 3 best in the whole country. And the head of the National Medical Enterprises, John Bedrosian, created the Bedrosian Center for Governance and Public Enterprise and made major contributions. Well, my point is, board members gave us millions and millions of dollars, not just in the short run. While I was dean, I think we had come up with 16 million at the time I left, but the stream continued from that board over time and has put the school in a much better position. Eventually, it made it possible for the school to convince the Price Foundation to give it a naming gift of $50 million, which are now known as the Price School of Public Policy or Solomon Price School. And I don't have recent figures, but I think the school's endowment is now around $250 million. Paul, do you happen to know?
I don't know what it is offhand. Dr. Clayton, what I'm recognizing is, this is a really important case study, right? While we might not be able to relate to the fundraising side and the work that we do, it's an important case study to be able to recognize that you're given some pretty bad terms when you first came on as dean. And instead of wallowing in all the misfortunes that were happening on the fiscal side, you were able to turn it into something that not only turned around the direction of the school in both terms of the mission and resources available, but really sets a stage for the university to take advantage of it. So thinking about it as, the department and as it relates to the larger organization to really maximize those foundations that you said, particularly in terms of the relationships that you build up. I'm pulling away a couple of different things. If I can pull some common themes together as a way to help summarize. The first thing that I picked up was thinking about what we do through a systems lens. So that being the interconnection of everything that's happening within the organization and not seeing it as a bunch of one-offs, but see it as a collective system. The other thing that I'm hearing is the recognition that there's multiple layers in what we do. And while we can generally frame it as complex organizations, it's important to recognize the complexity of organizations and also to be able to break it into smaller chunks that then become measurable. So as we get into co-alignment theory of being able to recognize there's different components coming in, for example, the agenda, network, and domain are all important. And I'm hearing one additional theme, and that's the importance of the relationships coming into play as we think about it from maybe the political side of the work that you do. Is that a fair summary of our conversation thus far?
It really is. I need to say that when I shouldn't say I did this or I did that, because really we had a tremendous group of people that I was out in front of, but they were pushing me in the right direction most of the time. So that would be a comment I need to make. Another, I didn't mention, but I should throw in the fact that we ran an annual fundraising dinner in downtown Los Angeles and Beverly Hills. That raised millions of dollars for student aid. And that's where having connections with the networks of executives paid off, because they would buy tables for the dinner at $25,000 a table, and they were happy to help us do that. And board members would ask other executives because to do that because they owed them, because they had gone to their dinners. So Los Angeles has a tremendous number of fundraising dinners, and people keep chits. And we were beginning to be a chit collector, which was very nice. So I attribute that primarily to my development officer, Christine Glogow, who made that dinner her raison d'être, her reason for existence. She just lived that thing, and it really worked well. And I was sorry to see it end, because it gave us visibility that we needed. But you summed up my comments very well, and it made the conversation more meaningful. So I thank you for that.
I appreciate your insights and the constant themes that continue to emerge. For example, the dinner, while I might not be working on a fundraiser dinner, we do have stakeholders. And how do I identify who those stakeholders are? And how do I work on those relationships to be able to set up something in the future is an important takeaway as well of how do we recognize the stakeholders, not in times of necessarily need, but being able to build it up over time.
Yeah, at lunch, when I asked people to come on our board, their first question was, are you asking me for money? And I'm saying, not initially. I'm asking you to be a part of my network, but I'm asking you to share your network with the school so that your contacts can be tapped into on behalf of the school. So I was leveraging their networks while building my network, and they seemed to understand that and were happy to do that. And actually, a number of the people we honored at our dinners came from their connections to those people. For example, Henry Kissinger or President Bush, or who we had really outstanding people we honored, but most of them we had access to because of our use of networks of our Board of Counselors. So I agree with you. Stakeholders are important.
I want to be mindful of your time and appreciate all your insights today. What recommendations do you have for those in public service that are in senior positions right now as it relates to our conversation today?
Well, let's see. I'd say look for opportunities to be affiliated with the university, because I think they will benefit you as much as you benefit the university, and you'll make some connections that'll be very useful to you. So I think that would be a lesson I would give. For example, we had a student in the business school we put on our Board of Counselors, which seemed a little bit strange, but his name was Rick Caruso, and the CAO of Los Angeles City and County both said, you need him on your board. He's on our Department of Water and Power Commission, and he's becoming its chairman, and he's an up-and-coming young man. Well, hell, he's now the chairman of the Board of Trustees at USC, and I don't know if he even remembers his short time on our Board of Counselors, but maybe he does. But he built connections on that board that have served him well over time. And it's that kind of extended networking that really pays off for people. So be networkers would be a summary comment. Be networkers.
Thanks, Dr. Clayton. I appreciate your time today.
Okay, and thank you for being such a good moderator. It kept me from grinding on through my paper.
And as you note your paper, we'll make the paper available to our audience as well. It'll be on our website, and we'll have more information on how to go about accessing it for a deeper dive in today's conversation.
It's a lot more lucid than my comments. Have a good day, Paul.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.